yeah, let's just dive right in. My name's Jackie. I'm an educational developer here at the Center for Excellence Learning and Teaching. I work with Saudi and Quill. And this is our intro workshop to the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. I do want to start with a land acknowledgement. So Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory, which is the treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land in which we all work, and for some of us live on, including myself. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I encourage everyone here to take a look at some of those resources down below. You have a copy of these slides, and so you should be able to click the links there. Nativeland.ca is a resource that allows you to see the different territories across North America. Indigenous territories across North America. Yellowhead Institute is an institute here at TMU that focuses on Indigenous advocacy and the land back movement. Standing Strong Task Force here at TMU, as well as some other Indigenous TMU resources. So I encourage you all to take a look at some of those to learn more and hopefully do more. I'm Jackie. I'm an educational developer here at the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. And I specialize in program evaluation and SoTL. And so prior to my role here at TMU, I worked on some national and international projects focused on improving and studying equity, diversity, and inclusion, so EDI in science education and research. I currently serve as a peer reviewer for the Canadian Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, so CanJ-SoTL, CJ-SoTL, as well as some other more discipline-specific educational research journals. And so the Journal of Chemical Education and the Journal of Research and Science Teaching. I'm always happy to talk about SoTL. I'm really excited that we get a chance to talk about it today. I know that one of the goals of the center especially is to sort of expand its SoTL resources and impact. And so I'm excited to be in a space today where we can all talk about this really cool stuff. If you're part of the Excellence in Teaching program, or if you were interested in it, this workshop counts towards your workshop requirements for the program. If you're not familiar with the program, it's basically a professional development program. So it's designed to provide faculty and contract lecturers at TMU with opportunities to enhance the impact of their teaching and participate in the community of educators committed to excellence in teaching and learning. So you get a chance to design and or redesign courses and learning experiences, collaborate with myself and my colleagues here at the center on that process or those processes, receive recognition for your participation in the program that you can use in your teaching dossiers and for other career stages, and then participate in a supportive community of educators and mentors. So again, the link to learn more is in the slides. So what are we here to talk about? By the end of the session, you will be able to hopefully define what SoTL is and what it isn't, and its potential benefits to different educational stakeholders, identify the different stages of a typical SoTL project, and outline practical first steps to initiate your own SoTL project. This is meant to be a very introductory session. There are other workshops that we have lined up throughout the next few months that sort of dive more deeply into the different stages in particular of a SoTL project. But hopefully this will give you a sense of what SoTL is, what it might look like, and how you might get started. So I will say, as someone who has been working in SoTL for a while now, the definitions that I've heard have varied quite a bit depending on who you're talking to and what you're reading. And so to capture that in this presentation, I have selected three definitions from three different people on what SoTL is. So the first comes from Chick. So Nancy Chick, SoTL is a synthesis of teaching, learning, and research in post-secondary education that brings a scholarly lens, the curiosity, the inquiry, the rigor, the disciplinary perspectives, and the attention to larger conversations, to what happens when learning happens or doesn't. So I already see like some of what you've talked about in the chat coming out in this definition. So I think someone talked about, so Lori said the psychology of learning. So focusing on what happens when learning happens or doesn't could speak to the psychology. Other people talked about how it's research. And so, yeah, there is usually a research component to SoTL, knowledge production, paying attention to larger conversations about uh, uh, teaching and learning more broadly. Yeah, loving that larger conversation piece really speaks to making meaning, taking action. Thanks, Elizabeth. All right, another definition from Hutchings et al. Any scholarship, research, or inquiry activities with a focus on supporting student learning experiences can be considered SoTL. And then the final definition from Felton in 2013. SoTL is inquiry focused on student learning. It looks at disciplinary knowledge and skills and the cultivation of attitudes or habits connected to learning. It is grounded in the disciplinary, institutional, environmental, or cultural context in which learning is taking place. So a few things jump out to me, and this is sort of a conglomeration of the general ideas posed in those definitions. SoTL projects focus on improving student learning and educational experiences. They involve students as partners in inquiry and learning, and so inviting students into the conversations you're having about, and the thoughts you're having about teaching and learning, and leveraging their expertise and their perspectives to learn more about how you can improve your teaching. They're guided by questions that are grounded in the local context and current knowledge. And we'll talk about this a bit more deeply in a sec, but it's this idea of you have a question about how things are going in your class, and you use that to sort of build a project around. And so it's questions you have about what might be happening in your classroom, at your institution, and using that to develop a project. They're conducted using sound and ethical methods. You share your findings with others, both researchers and educators. And so, again, it's not scholarship unless you share it. And they include a clearly defined research lens. As you'll notice from the introductions, we're all coming from different disciplinary backgrounds, and each discipline comes with its own norms, traditions, what it defines as rigorous research. And so one beautiful thing about SoTL is that it is multidisciplinary, but it can also mean that we need to be very clear about the research lens and the theoretical lenses in which we approach this kind of work. And so one of the, I guess, tenets of strong SoTL projects is that they include a clearly defined research perspective or lens. Maybe I'll pause here now if anyone has any questions before we dive into the next piece. No? Okay. Again, feel free to pop things in the chat. These are the stages of a quote unquote traditional SoTL project. So you identify a problem or question, you do some research, some reading on that problem or question. You decide whether you require ethics review, research ethics approval for that project that you're planning. You gather and analyze evidence to answer your question. And then from your findings, you can begin to share them with others around you. Who stands to benefit from SoTL? In what ways? Students, that it can help students build a sense of collective ownership over the learning process. It helps them develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills, gain a deeper, more practical understanding of learning, discipline-specific content and skills. For instructors, so many of you, improved class activities and course designs, increased student engagement and participation, incorporation of new ideas and perspectives into your teaching practice. At the program level, and this could be within your departments, within your faculty, you get a chance to collect high quality evidence for internal/external assessment and accreditation purposes, and also allows you to develop these cross-disciplinary collaborations that support innovation. So I've seen, I come from a chemistry background, and so there are a lot of overlaps, I suppose, between the challenges that chemistry instructors face with those that biology instructors face, for example. And so finding ways to develop those connections across disciplines can really be a powerful benefit from SoTL. Institutions, improving visibility of student learning taking place within our institutions, building transdisciplinary learning communities, and then fostering Broader conversations and awareness about equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, technological advancements, and just in general, just evolving pedagogical practices, getting a sense of what works in our classrooms, what doesn't work, so that we can begin developing, I think someone mentioned earlier, a sense of of best practices. Who does SoTL? So many of you might be interested in participating in SoTL, and I'd be curious to know what you perceive as how you would respond to these questions on the left here. This was a research study led by Nicole Simmons, Dr. Nicole Simmons at Brock University in 2020. She interviewed 7 SoTL scholars who ranged in their level of experience with SoTL. So some of these scholars had only a year of experience engaging in SoTL, whereas some had up to 15 years. She asked them why they engage in SoTL, what supports they have for their SoTL work, what challenges they face with their work, benefits and impacts. And she asked them and she used these interviews to sort of detail how they're experiencing each of these, I guess, aspects at the individual level, at a department/faculty level, and institutional level, so macro, and then mega, sort of beyond the institution. So a lot of these folks engage in SoTL because they want to become, I guess, quote unquote, masters of teaching, or to develop teaching mastery at the community level, at the meso level, engage purpose, connecting with others across their institution. In terms of benefits, new inquiry in people, engaging students, expanding horizons, developing disciplinary and transdisciplinary ties. I see it here at the macro level on the impact of SoTL work, improving institutional culture around teaching. But I think a big challenge for many of us who come from these different disciplinary backgrounds where we already have, existing research programs, potentially, and also these teaching commitments, the challenges to SoTL work can be things like lack of time, lack of SoTL knowledge, lack of value and community around SoTL, lack of funding. And so hopefully from this presentation today, we can talk about some strategies to navigate some of these challenges. I know for me, this idea of lack of SoTL knowledge was really a big barrier for me, at least. I come from a chemistry background, like I said, and so the questions we ask in chemistry are very, very different from the questions we ask in the classroom and in the scholarship of teaching and learning. In chemistry, we're focused on, I have these molecules, I have these chemicals, what can I make with them? What did I make? So using instrumentation to get a sense of, what is actually happening in these beakers and flasks that I'm using, and what are these chemicals useful for? So I sort of had to shift my thinking around what I was doing and the types of research I was comfortable with to when I was navigating over to this more SoTL specific work. And so thinking about what works in the classroom, what could be better, are there new approaches that I could be employing in the classroom to improve student learning experiences? What's happening with students as they progress through my course? How are they responding to certain activities in the ways that I expected them to respond? And so it requires a shift in thinking, it requires a shift in, I think, what we might be comfortable with from our own disciplinary backgrounds. But I think with the right supports and with the right community, can be a really fulfilling experience. All right, let's dive into the next part of this workshop, which is the different stages of a typical SoTL project. So I shared this already. These are the sort of the 5 general stages at a high level. So identifying a problem or question, conducting a literature review, research ethics, gathering and analyzing evidence, and then sharing your findings. So I'm going to just dive into each of these stages in a bit more detail. Again, given time, I won't be able to go into like a full 20-minute presentation for each of these stages. But if you are interested in each of these in a bit more detail, we have those upcoming workshops. So identifying a problem or question. So this is, I think, going to sort of detail the types of questions you might be curious about when it comes to developing your SoTL project. So the most common question I see, the most common type of research question I see when it comes to SoTL is questions about what works. what evidence can be found for the effectiveness of different teaching approaches, tools, or interventions in your course. And so as an example, maybe you have a new case study activity that you're planning to roll out in your course this year. And so maybe your question is how are students responding to this case study activity? That could be sort of the foundation for your SoTL project. And so that would be a question where you're curious about the effectiveness of that case study activity on student learning and its most basic level. Other questions could focus on what things look like. What does it look like? So can the features of a particular approach, student experience, or learning dynamic be described in detail? So building on that case study example, maybe instead of getting a sense of how students, how effective the case study approach is, maybe you're just more curious about how students are engaging in the activity at a holistic level. And so observing students, how students are engaging in the case study activity, get a sense of how they're interacting with each other, how they're interacting with the material, getting a sense of how things look. What could be, so thinking about what goals for teaching and learning have yet to be met in the university classroom. And so maybe it's reflecting on your learning outcomes or some of the activities that you have in the class, and then using that reflection. Or maybe it's even talking to students to get a sense of what goals they think are missing from the class and using that to develop activities and evaluating those activities with some of these questions up top. And then what's underneath? What conceptual frameworks shape our thoughts about teaching practice? So maybe it's reflection about, some of the frameworks that you use to approach your teaching. There are different ways that we think about teaching. So there are sociocultural frameworks, constructivist frameworks. So thinking about, how these intersect with our practice and how they might, how you might revise your practice depending on the different frameworks you choose to use. From there, once you've identified a question, there are many resources out there to dive more deeply into existing literature and research. So again, building on that case study example, I can say for certain that there are many other folks in the world and in history who have implemented an activity like a case study activity and then sought to evaluate its effectiveness. And so you can look to journals like the Canadian Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning to learn more about research on similar activities. There's the International Society of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, their journal titled the Teaching and Learning Inquiry. At the more discipline-specific level, there are often discipline-specific educational research journals. And so from my background, there's the Journal of Chemical Education and Chemistry Education Research and Practice are the two main journals. This was just one I found for engineering. So the Journal of Engineering Education, which focuses on educational research within the discipline of engineering. Most likely there are going to be journals, educational research journals for your specific discipline. So this QR code and this link will take you to a list of journals, SoTL journals from the University of Saskatchewan. So they've compiled a big list of different SoTL journals and they've organized them in terms of different disciplines as well. So it could be a useful way to get a sense of what's out there for your particular discipline. Any questions so far? I'm just going to take a quick sip of water. No. Okay. All right, let's move into research ethics. So oftentimes when we're engaging in SoTL, I would say like 95 to 99% of the time, we are working with human participants, right? We're working with students, we're working with student data, we're working with colleagues who are also human beings. And so any research involving human participants requires careful consideration of ethics. Ethics can include respect for persons, and so including their autonomy to freely choose to participate in your project or not. Justice, so treating people fairly and equitably. And then concern for welfare, privacy, informed, making sure that people have a right to privacy, that their right to privacy is upheld, informed and ongoing consent, and that you've minimized the risks for participating in your project and maximized the benefits. This all comes from the Tri-Council policy statement. So this is a government document or where it details ethical conduct for research involving humans. So TCPS2. This is also, they also have, so TCPS2 also has a what's called TCPS2 core, and I'll talk about that in the coming slide. But it's essentially an online module that's highly recommended that you complete before you apply for any sort of research ethics approval. It basically gives you the foundation from which you can start developing your projects in ethical and sound ways. So that's, again, all there in the slides if you want to dive more deeply into that. There's also, I think, a conversation to be had about what counts as research and what is required from the ethics perspective when it comes to research versus program evaluation. So when we're talking about research, what we really mean is any undertaking intended to extend knowledge through disciplined inquiry or systematic investigation. So anything that's defined as research, you will require ethics approval to do. If, however, you are engaging in some sort of quality assurance or quality improvement study, program evaluation activity, performance review, or testing within normal educational requirements when used exclusively for assessment, management, or improvement purposes, these do not constitute research for the purposes of this policy, and so they do not fall within the scope of our review. I will say that this dichotomy is very blurry, and I am not the best person to ask when it comes to what defines research versus what defines all these other things. The best people to talk to are TMU's research ethics team. So there's a whole team of folks over at the research ethics office who are more than happy to answer any questions you have about your proposed project and whether you require ethics for it. They will also be there to walk you through the ethics process, because I know that that can be a rather, can be a very arduous process at times. Andre, on ethics, any particular resources you can guide us to working on teaching and learning with kids and youth? This is an area we're doing a bit of work. That's a good question. That would still, that would still go through the research ethics board, like the normal approval process. So basically any research that you're doing as a member of TMU, as a person, sorry, as a I forget what you said your role was, but if you're a faculty member, you would have to go through the research ethics board. All right. Once you have gone through the ethics process, or maybe not gone through the ethics process if you are not doing research, you can begin to gather and analyze evidence. And there are generally two approaches to this. So you can collect what is known as quantitative data. So quantitative data is numerical data and using statistical methods to measure and analyze variables. Common ways you might do this in your courses are collecting student responses to surveys that you've developed, analyzing students' grades, and anything that really just involves numbers. An example question that might fit best within the quantitative approach could be, how does this new chemistry curriculum that I've developed impact student test scores? And so with this question, you could use a quantitative approach to analyze how students' test scores have changed prior to and after the implementation of your new curriculum. There is qualitative data. And so in contrast to quantitative, this is descriptive, non-numerical data that explores ideas and experiences. And so commonly in SoTL, we do this through interviews and focus groups. Basically anything that allows you to get a more detailed sense of what people are experiencing and how they're experiencing. So how do students perceive the new curriculum's lab components could be the impetus for a qualitative SoTL project. Again, this is this is dichotomous how I'm showing it, but there is quite a bit of this is a spectrum in reality. There are definitely projects where what are known as mixed methods, where you can engage in both quantitative and qualitative. You could collect a large amount of qualitative data that you can then use as numerical data and conduct more of a quantitative analysis on that qualitative data. So there's these are just, I guess, basic vocabulary from which you could start to build more complex projects. Again, if you want to dive more deeply into any particular method, we have these upcoming workshops on quantitative and qualitative methods in February of 2025 and January 2025, respectively. Sharing your findings. So this quote from Lee Shulman in 1999, I think really highlights the importance of sharing your findings in scholarship. So Shulman says, an act of intelligence or of artistic creation becomes scholarship when it possesses at least three attributes. It becomes public, it becomes an object of critical review and evaluation by members of one's community, and members of one's community begin to use, build upon, and develop those acts of mind and creation. You could be collecting all this wonderful evidence about how effective you are as an educator in your classroom, but if you never share any of that stuff with anyone else, that what you're doing is not, I would argue, is not scholarship. It only becomes scholarship once you share it with other folks, once you go through some sort of review process and get a sense of, you know, how this fits within the larger body of work that is SoTL. And so some places you might share your work once you have some interesting findings are some of the journals like I talked about earlier, so the Canadian Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And then a quick plug here for our TMU Learning and Teaching Conference. And so this is a conference that's held every year in May. So the next one is in May of 2025. And that's definitely a place where you can, if you have some really fascinating stuff that you found through your SoTL work, that's a place where you can share that. So let's just walk through a quick example. So my question, how does the new chemistry curriculum that I've developed impact student test scores? I'll consult some previous research on curriculum evaluation in chemistry, maybe even beyond chemistry. I'll secure research ethics board approval. So I'll work with the REB folks here at TMU to complete a ethics application and hopefully secure ethics approval in a timely manner. And then I'll do a quantitative investigation. So I'll compare student test scores before and after the new curriculum. And then once I find some interesting things, hopefully, I'll share what I found at TMU's Learning and Teaching Conference. And I think one of the beautiful things about not just SoTL, but science is that anytime you have answers to the questions you started with, these are rarely answers, they're just more questions. And so often what we'll find is that we have new questions about how things are going in our courses, and these sort of just feedback into a new cycle of a new SoTL project. And I think that's one of the biggest, I guess, things I'll try and emphasize here is that if you haven't started in your SoTL work, that's absolutely okay. I think just getting started is a big step. And then once you get started, I can say for certain that it does get easier because you just have more questions, you have more connections as you go through this process, and your journey as a SoTL scholar really just shoots up exponentially. So, all right, let's talk about some practical first steps. Maybe before I do that, any questions about what we just talked about? No? All good? Okay. Getting started on your SoTL journey. So I think the first thing is to think about the problem or question that you have that you want to sort of focus your project on. Is there something in your classroom that you're curious about? Something you want to improve? Is there a new approach you want to try? And so these could be, the answers to these questions could sort of serve as the starting point from which to build an entire project. So maybe you're curious about a new activity and you want to just get a sense of how that activity is going from the student perspective. Maybe you just don't like how things are going in your course and you want to try some new things. And again, just work with students in that process to develop some new strategies and activities and then get a sense of their perspectives as they go through the course. These are all wonderful starting points. And then I think, again, I'll plug the workshop we have coming up in December. If you are interested, please bring some of those ideas to that workshop, and then we can sort of workshop them more and refine them a bit more into some tangible research questions and projects. Another thing that I encourage you to do is to complete the TCPS2 core. So this is that set of online modules where you can learn more about how to do ethical research. And then engage with existing SoTL communities, resources, and opportunities, including those at TMU. And so I'll circle back to Nicole Simmons' work. You'll notice that I didn't show you this supports for SoTL work row, and that was kind of strategic. One of the biggest supports for these 7 SoTL scholars was at the institutional level. So the teaching center, funding, and supportive leaders. So I'll talk briefly about some of the things that we offer here at the center when it comes to supporting SoTL. We have our Excellence in Teaching program. I mentioned this at the start. This is a professional development program for faculty members and instructors designed to support the tenure and promotion process. Part of the ETP is you developing some sort of new approach, new intervention, new activity in your course, and then evaluating the impact of that, quote unquote impact, however you define impact of that activity. And so that could be a SoTL project because you are trying something new in your class, you're gathering evidence of its impact and effectiveness in some way. And so that could be an example of SoTL. The Teaching Fellows Program, this is a fellowship that provides faculty with an opportunity to engage deeply with a pedagogical issue, problem, or challenge. So this is specifically for folks who have, pre-existing ideas or projects planned out for a SoTL project. And so they come to us and apply to this program, and then we offer funding and professional development opportunities to help them carry out their work. We have learning and teaching grants, and so these are grants to implement evidence-informed pedagogical methods that will have a long-term impact on the undergraduate and graduate student experience. And then coming soon, we have the Black Focus Pedagogies grants. And so these are grants to amplify and build upon the groundbreaking research and community-based initiatives at the university through Black scholarship and research. And so these are all opportunities for you to either get the support of members of the center with work related to SoTL, or to get money to do SoTL work, to hire research assistants, to share your work at conferences. And so these are all ways that you might take our first step in getting involved. The last quick thing I'll mention is that we, again, at the center, we have a whole team of folks who are more than happy to chat about teaching and learning, including SoTL. So you're always welcome to reach out to us for one-on-one consultations. And as I've been talking throughout this workshop, we have, I think, 4 or 5 other workshops on SoTL coming up throughout the year. So if you are curious about any of those other, any of the things that we've talked about and want to learn a bit more in detail, I encourage you to check out those workshops.